The claim of conscious AI. We'll be looking at such a claim again, in this case, Hinton's neuron test for consciousness, in our continuing series of Bergson and the holographic theory. So, a recent interview with Geoff Hinton, the premier, very key AI theorist, had this exchange. This is on this interview over here on the right with Andrew Marr. So Marr is saying, do you think consciousness has already happened inside AI? Hinton, yes, I do. So let me give you a little test. Suppose I take one neuron in your brain, one brain cell, and I replace it by a little piece of nanotechnology that behaves in exactly the same way. So it's getting pings from other neurons, and it's responding by sending out pings. So it's responding in exactly the same way the brain cell responded. I've just replaced one brain cell. Are you still conscious? I think you say you are. Marr, absolutely. I don't think I notice. Hinton, and I think you can see where this argument is going. Marr, yes, I can, yes. What's the problem here? Let's take a look. Let's take that quote again. Suppose I take one neuron in your brain, one brain cell, and replace it by a little piece of nanotechnology that behaves exactly the same way. This is, of course, Hinton's faith. AI knows exactly what neurons are doing. It's this. To AI, a neuron is a simple computational unit. There's a one-way flow down the neuron. There's a signal strength in and a signal strength out. It follows the classic action potential model, where we've got a propagating wave of voltage down the neuron as what are termed channels open. There have been doubters. Hameroff, Stewart, well known, thinks the computational unit is microtubules within the neuron. Ultimately, these are qubits, and he sees the brain as a quantum computer. I've discussed the problems with this particular conception. It's still a form of computation, classic computation in reality. Hinton would be fine with it. There are other views. I'm not going to go into them. I'm just going to note that this view of Dave Logan and I that we've advanced holds a far greater problem for this particular view of Hinton and his neuron. For Hinton to be saying his AI is conscious, he's equally saying his AI is sentient. To have experience is to be sentient, to see that coffee cup, to experience the coffee cup, liquid swirling, we're stirring. Our experience is undeniably our image of the external world. The image is specific to a certain scale of time. I've noted this a lot along this series. But again, the Minkowski space-time manifold has no particular scale. Do we visualize it as quarks, as electron clouds, as stable cups, spoons, buzzing flies, or at an even larger scale? What if the cups are just disintegrating as we watch, as they collapse atomically, or the spoons start disintegrating? The brain, its neurochemical dynamics, is imposing this scale of time. The standard coffee cup with the fly buzzing by, the cups, liquids. Fly, wings a blur. But this is one of many possible scales that the brain can place upon that Minkowski manifold. LSD, the common experience. The fly's wings slow down. The coffee swirls slow down, then the spoon is moving more slowly. Speech slows down. The word conversation would be conversation. Colors get more vibrant. Something has changed with Hinton's neuron, or neurons. It can't just be a simple input-output device. What's the model here? So let me return to the original neuron and its action potential. The neuron is bathed inside and outside in a chemical, watery, liquid soup. The neural membrane separates two phases of electrolytes in the soup. On stimulation, sodium / voltage gated channels open in a series. The lower half of the picture there has the voltage jumps from channel to channel. The voltage change, or the action potential, passes down the neuron. That is, the electrolytes move from one side of the membrane to the other. Now replace the watery chemical soup. Visualize the brain as a big block of gelatin, a protein that keeps water in a highly organized state. Gelatin is mostly water, yet it behaves as a solid. The water is adsorbed onto the gelatin and is not in a free state. The electrolytes also not free. Albert Ling, with the association induction hypothesis, lived 1919 to 2019, 100 years, and very hated by the biochemical community. Ling demonstrated exhaustively that all positive ions, like positive potassium, are bound to their opposite charge on the cell. They are associated. The association, quote unquote, part of his AI hypothesis. They're not just sitting there, not just floating in space, not waiting to be channeled to either side of the membrane, as convention claims. One other thing to note, the physical state of a gelatinous system can be modified by its surroundings. Depending on how much vinegar you add, the jello may not solidify. It may form separate orbs surrounded by liquid water. Whatever. Key here, the absorption of water and ions is conditional on the state of the gelatin, and it's cooperative. At a certain state of acidity, all of the water will be free. Therefore, the water cooperates, going from one state to another based on the acidity of the jello. For Ling, the acidity of this gelatinous mixture is under the control of a small number of molecules, termed the cardinal adsorbent. When ATP is present, the fixed negative charges of the living cell have a preference for potassium, K+ there. When the neuron fires, the ATP is lost. Now the fixed negative charge does not prefer potassium or sodium. The sodium will come rushing in, or on the conventional picture, channels are opening. Rather than seeing an individual neuron, the whole brain is now viewed as a gelatinous mass, where the neurons form, shall we say, little structures within that mass. It's under the control of ATP and other important molecules. It goes back and forth from preferring to absorb potassium and highly organized water to having no preference for either. The generation of ATP by metabolism is therefore the small energy input, like pushing a pendulum. Thus we're getting those cell cycles, the alpha cycle, the gamma cycle, etc. An important piece here. When the electrolyte leaves the cell, the stuff outside the cell, between the neurons, is not meaningless. The space, is coordinating the whole mass. Note, in the standard neuron theory, that space has no function whatsoever. Stoke et al., 2018, show that all billion yeast cells in a culture are in phase with each other so long as the density in that mass is high enough. The space between the neurons is shared in coordinating the phase locking. It's all one large gelatinous mass. Now speed up these phase lock cycles. How? The key receptor for LSD, the 5-HT2AR, has a very high valued induction index. It provides an electronic action. Here's a little snippet from a table in that paper. This is Dave Logan's brilliance to determine all this. But you can see the 5-H2A there on the bottom has a very large mean inductive index. The lower the number, the better. So LSD acts as a cardinal adsorbent, like ATP, but more powerful. The oscillation of the entire mass, or at least the portions LSD affects, is sped up. The frequency of the cycles, theta, alpha, increases. The specified scale of time changes. Fly becomes heron-like. The spoon circles more slowly in the coffee. The swirls slow down. Coffee swirls. The mouse is moving by more slowly. Well, I don't have a mouse there, but if I was a cat, I would. Speech, as heard, slows. Colors. Oscillating fields themselves more vibrant. If we place this in its Bergson Gibson framework, as I've always been doing here, just for those that are new here that haven't seen the framework in which this is all placed, it's in a holographic framework, where the reconstructive wave, a reconstructive wave is in the top there, is being sent through a hologram, and the wave rising to the eye is, from the object wave, rising to the eye is specific to its source, the cup, the original source of the wave pattern on that plate. So this oscillating mass, our jello there, is supporting a modulated reconstructive wave passing through a holographic field. The modulation resonance pattern in Gibson's framework, the brain is resonating. The resonance pattern, the modulation pattern, is driven by the invariant structure of the event. That very complex structure of velocity flow fields, adiabatic ratios, inertial tensors, etc. Very important structure. The wave then is specific to a source within the field. That is within the field, not within the brain, within the field, the external field, the coffee cup and stirring spoon. Now as an image of an otherwise undecipherable, unimageable field, the holographic field. Now an image within that field, an image at a scale of time due to the oscillating frequency, the biodynamics of the brain. And we note this scale of the flapping wings fly, the heron-like fly, is just as objective as this normal scale with the buzzing fly. All we've done is introduce a catalyst to raise the frequency of oscillation of the mass. Now I know this is all within a certain dosage level of LSD. As the dosage rises, the effects, the overall discombobulating effects on the brain start to take over, and we get more and more quote-unquote hallucinations. Maybe pink elephants going by, as we'll see Hinton discussing. So back to Hinton with this test, where he says, with your silicon I/O device, replace one neuron at a time, and you still have consciousness. That is, he's in effect saying, you still have this experience, the sentience. We're still seeing the coffee being stirred. We're still stirring it. We still sense ourselves stirring it. Now, Hinton has no theory of the origin of this image of the experience or the experience of the external world, particularly if he sticks to his schema of pixels, that is bits, ultimately mathematically correlated via weights as groups, that is a pixel group that forms the 9 there, with a high probability of response has a certain label that is a 9. That is, as my little note there says, the output unit corresponding to a 9 holds the highest probability of response. It's classified as a 9 because that's got the highest probability of response. But this is not an image. This is an attributed image by us saying, oh, the system sees, quote unquote, a 9. But there's no seeing whatsoever. It's simply mathematical correlation of those pixels to a response unit, nothing more. That's not a theory of the origin of the image. Now you might do, however, some number of replacements with his silicon I/O device. This might keep things working up to some number of replacements. But the silicon chips are not an integral part of the concrete neural mass as it oscillates. Eventually, you're going to have failure of the actual function of the entire oscillating mass because it simply cannot possibly be acting the same way anymore. further introduce a cardinal adsorbent like LSD, as we just talked about. Do the chips participate in the change of experience? Are they going to have anything to do with the change of experience? Are they going to cause the fly to slow down to a heron-like fly? Obviously not. But the 5-HT2AR, that receptor is just one of 5,200 cell types, as we saw Christoph Koch noting. Just one. Take DMT. You have a different effect entirely. It's likely acting on a different receptor in a different way. DMT, you're very possibly taken to what is rather commonly experienced as a dimension of elves. It's almost, as it were, an objective dimension. You're taken to this dimension of elves. Or another one is a common experience, a dimension where you're examined by aliens. Not that fun. Psilocybin is going to have a different effect. In effect, each psychedelic operates very differently on very different receptors with very different mechanisms. But here's the choice. You can stick with your impoverished, limited view of our brains and of the nature of mind inherent in AI, or you can start considering a far richer theory. AI is never going to explain the power of our brains to go to different dimensions, shall we say, via these psychedelics or via meditation. So Hinton discussed a hard problem in this particular discussion here, Too Fast to Intelligence, 2023. And I think he was asked a question, but he says this: I think people have completely misunderstood what the mind is and what subjective experience is. So let's suppose that I just took a lot of LSD. Now, he has no theory of LSD. And now I'm seeing little pink elephants. And I want to tell you what's going on in my perceptual field. So I would tell you, quote, I've got this subjective experience like little pink elephants in front of me. Let's unpack what that means. What I'm doing is I'm trying to tell you what is going on in my perceptual system. We have this idea that things out there in the world give rise to percepts. To be real concrete, like this. Things out there in the world like stirring the coffee give rise to that image of stirring coffee. Visual, kinesthetic, auditory. So forget the pink elephants. How does he account for coffee stirring? So he says, so when I say that I have this subjective experience of little pink elephants, I'm trying to tell you about my perceptual system via the idea of normal perception. I'm trying to say, what's going on here would be normal perception if there were little pink elephants. But the little pink elephants, what's funny about them is not that they're made of qualia in an inner world. What's funny about them is that they're counterfactual. They're not in the real world, but they're the kind of things that could be. So they're not made of spooky stuff in an inner theater. They're made of counterfactual stuff in a perfectly normal world. And that's what I think is going on when people talk about perceptual experience. There's no answer here to Chalmers' question. How do we get the coffee stirring from neurochemical flows or changing bit patterns? That is, how normal perception. Remember, I'm trying to tell you about the idea of normal perception, but he has no idea of normal perception. He's just hand-waved to this whole quote explanation, unquote. Is the coffee stirring, as opposed to being counterfactual stuff like the pink elephants, just factual stuff? As though this mere phrase is an explanation? Well, this is the conceptual impoverishment of current AI. So next we'll see. The environment is amazingly target rich, and we'll be seeing some more of this. I recommend this book of mine if you want to see this discussed in nice, logical, coherent detail in a book. So till then, signing off.